You came with nothing, you leave with nothing.
I never needed anything from you.
The acquisition is ready for your final approval.
Proceed.
You planned all this?
You never knew who I was.
You came with nothing, you leave with nothing, Daniel Whitmore shouted, his voice cutting through the quiet street as he hurled Ava Sterling's suitcase onto the wet lawn like it disgusted him. Neighbors stepped out onto their porches. His mother clapped slowly behind him. His mistress smiled and recorded everything. Ava didn't react. She just bent down in the rain, folding her dress with steady hands. 6 hours earlier, she had signed a $60 billion deal, and not one of them had any idea who they were humiliating. Welcome to today's story. If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. 3 days earlier, everything had already started to fall apart, just not in the way Daniel believed. The house on Bellhaven Drive looked like wealth from the outside. Clean white stone, tall windows. A driveway long enough to make a statement. It was the kind of place people slowed down to admire. Inside, it felt different. Ava moved through the kitchen quietly that morning, placing a cup of coffee on the counter the way she always did. No rush, no noise. She had learned early that in this house, silence was safer than anything else. Daniel stood near the island, scrolling through his phone, barely glancing at her. "You're late," he said, without looking up. Ava paused. The clock on the wall said 8:30. She had been awake since 6. "I made your calls list for the morning," she said calmly. "It's on your desk." He gave a short laugh, the kind that didn't mean anything good. "You think I need help with my schedule?" She didn't answer. That was how it had been for months, small comments, small cuts. Nothing loud enough to defend, just enough to remind her where she stood in his version of the marriage. To Daniel, she was the quiet wife. The one he had taken in, the one who should be grateful. He liked telling that story. Margaret Whitmore liked it even more. "You let her move around this house like she belongs here," Margaret had said just the night before. Standing in the same kitchen, her pearls catching the light. "People are starting to notice, Daniel." A woman like that attached to this family name. Ava had been standing right there when she said it. Margaret hadn't lowered her voice. Ava had simply kept drying the dishes, because correcting people who had already decided who you were never worked. It only gave them something new to twist. Daniel believed she came from nothing. That was the version she allowed. He never asked deeper questions. Never wondered why she never talked about her past. Never questioned how easily she understood things he struggled to explain. It suited him not to know, because if he knew, he would have had to see her differently. And Daniel Whitmore needed to feel like the man with the power. Across the room, his phone buzzed again. He frowned at the screen, tension creeping into his face. Ava noticed. She always noticed. There had been more of those moments lately, or more late-night calls, more closed doors, more frustration he didn't explain. Bellhaven Holdings was struggling. He hadn't said it out loud, but the signs were everywhere. The sharper tone, the restless pacing, the way he snapped at things that didn't matter. Ava knew the pattern. She had seen it before, in boardrooms, in negotiations, in men who thought they were still in control when everything was already slipping. She could have helped him. That was the part no one in that house would have believed. She understood his company better than most of the people working inside it. She had seen the gaps, the mismanagement, the debt stacking quietly beneath polished reports, but she said nothing. Not because she didn't care, because she already knew what would happen if she spoke. He wouldn't listen, and worse, he would resent her for it, so she let him keep the illusion. From the outside, she looked like a woman living inside someone else's wealth. Inside, she was something else entirely. Her phone vibrated once in her pocket. Ava didn't reach for it right away. She waited. Daniel hated interruptions when he was in a mood like this. Only when he turned away toward the hallway did she slide the phone out quietly. A single message. No name saved. Just a line. We're ready. Final approval needed. Ava stared at it for a second, her thumb hovering over the screen. Then she locked the phone again and slipped it back into her pocket. Her face didn't change. She reached for her coffee instead. Calm. Measured. like nothing had just asked her to make a decision worth more than everything in that house combined. Who was that? Daniel asked suddenly, his voice sharper now as he turned back. No one, she said. He narrowed his eyes, but only for a second. Then he shook his head like it didn't matter, because in his mind, it didn't. Ava Sterling wasn't someone people called about important things. That was the assumption. That was the mistake. He walked past her without another word, heading upstairs. Ava stayed where she was for a moment longer. The kitchen felt too quiet, or not peaceful, empty. She set the cup down and looked toward the window. Outside, the lawn stretched clean and perfect under the morning light. In a few days, it would be wet. In a few days, everything would look different. She didn't know exactly how it would unfold, but she knew something had already shifted. You could feel it in the air before it happened. She reached into her pocket again, pulled out the phone, and opened the message. This time, she typed back. One word, proceed. She hit send. Somewhere far beyond Bellhaven Drive, things began to move, deals, signatures. People who never said her name out loud adjusting their plans around a decision she had just made in silence. Ava slipped the phone away again before anyone could see. When Daniel came back downstairs, she was already at the door picking up her bag. Where are you going? He asked. Out, she said simply. He scoffed. Must be nice. Or not having real responsible suitcase. She paused for just a second, not long enough for him to notice. Then she stepped outside. The air was cool, still. She closed the door behind her without another word. Inside the house, Daniel Whitmore believed he was still in control of everything. Outside, Ava walked to her car, calm as ever, because the truth was already in motion, and he had no idea what he had just set in motion with her silence. Daniel didn't notice the shift. That was the first thing Ava understood as she drove away from Bellhaven Drive. He was too busy holding on to a version of reality that made him feel powerful, too invested in the idea that he was still the man in control. The road stretched ahead of her, quiet and steady. The city waited beyond it, full of decisions he would never see coming. Her phone stayed silent for most of the drive. That, too, was intentional. The people who worked for her knew better than to call unless it mattered. And when it mattered, they didn't waste time. She parked in a structure attached to a glass building that looked like every other corporate tower downtown. Clean, polished, anonymous. No name on the outside that would mean anything to someone like Daniel. That was the point. Ava stepped out of the car and walked inside, without hesitation. No badge, no introduction. Just a quiet nod to the front desk. The receptionist straightened immediately. Good morning, Miss Sterling. Ava gave a small nod and kept walking. No one stopped her. No one questioned her. People moved slightly out of her way without thinking about it. It wasn't fear. It wasn't show. It was recognition. The elevator doors opened before she even pressed the button. Someone inside had been holding it. Morning, a man in a tailored suit said quickly, stepping aside. He didn't try to make conversation. He didn't pretend they were equals in that space. Ava stepped in. Silence followed her up to the top floor. When the doors opened again, the air felt different. Quieter, tighter, focused. A woman was already waiting just outside the conference room. Legal's inside, she said. Finance is ready. There's one issue. Ava didn't slow down. There's always one issue. They stepped into the room together. The table was long. Screens lit. Documents open. People mid-conversation who stopped the second she entered. Every chair shifted. Every voice went quiet. No one needed an introduction. Ava moved to the head of the table, not because she demanded it, but because that was where she belonged. What's the issue? She asked. A man on the left, late 50s, silver hair, leaned forward. The secondary asset group. There's a complication with one of the smaller firms included in the acquisition package. Ava glanced at the screen. She didn't need long. She recognized the name instantly. Bellhaven Holdings. Of course it was. It sat there on the list like it was just another number, just another struggling firm folded into something larger. But she knew better. She knew the debt structure, the inflated reports. The way Daniel had been trying to keep it afloat with borrowed time and borrowed money. No one in that room connected the dots. To them, it was just another weak company being absorbed. To her, it was her husband's entire identity. What's the complication? She asked. Outstanding liabilities, the man replied. They're worse than reported. If we move forward without restructuring, it could affect projections. Ava nodded once. She had expected that. What's the recommendation? Cut it loose, someone else said. Remove it from the deal. It's not worth the risk. The room waited. That was the moment. The moment where a decision would quietly decide someone's future. Ava leaned back slightly in her chair. Her face didn't change. Keep it in, she said. A few heads turned. It's manageable, she added. We restructure after pair acquisition. Fold the debt into where it needs to. The silver-haired man hesitated. It's not the cleanest move. It doesn't need to be clean, Ava said calmly. It needs to be controlled. Silence again, then slow nods. No one argued. Because when Ava spoke in that room, it wasn't opinion, it was direction. She signed off on the adjustment without another word. Just like that, Bellhaven Holdings stayed in the deal. Just like that, Daniel's company was no longer his. The meeting moved on. Numbers, timelines, legal language. Ava listened, asked a few questions, adjusted a clause that no one else had caught. Small things, important things. The kind of details that separated people who owned companies from people who worked inside them. Her phone vibrated once on the table. She didn't look at it right away. When she finally did, the message was short. From an unknown number. Dinner tonight, don't be late. Ava stared at it for a second. Then she locked the screen again. Of course, he still expected her to show up. Still expected her to play the role. Still believed she had nowhere else to go. Across the table, someone was speaking again. Final approval is all we need, the woman from legal said. Once you sign, everything moves forward. We're scheduled for closing in 72 hours. 72 hours. Ava folded her hands lightly on the table. That was the window, the space between what Daniel believed and what was about to happen to him. Prepare the final documents, she said. I'll review them tonight. The room shifted again. People relaxed slightly, because the hardest part was done. They just didn't know what it meant outside that room. The meeting ended slowly. One by one, people gathered their things and stepped out. Ava stayed seated for a moment longer. The screen in front of her still showed the asset list. Bellhaven Holdings sat there quietly among giants, small, insignificant, already disappearing into something bigger. She reached forward and tapped the screen once, zooming in, just to see it clearly. Just to confirm what she already knew. Then she leaned back again, no emotion, no hesitation. She had made the decision, now it would play out. By the time Daniel understood what was happening, it would already be done. She stood and left the room without another word. Back downstairs, the receptionist straightened again as Ava passed. Have a good day, Miss Sterling. Ava paused for just a second this time. You too, she said softly. Then she stepped outside. The city moved like it always did. Cars, people, noise, normal. Nothing about it suggested that somewhere above a decision had just been made that would erase a man's entire world. Her phone buzzed again. Another message, this one from a saved contact. Our documents ready. Need your signature before end of day. Ava looked at it longer this time. Then she typed back, send them. She slipped the phone into her bag and walked toward her car. Back on Bellhaven Drive, Daniel Whitmore was already planning dinner. He was already thinking about how to prove a point. About who would sit where, about who deserved to stay. He had no idea that the decision had already been made, and that by the time he finished humiliating her in his own house, he wouldn't own it anymore. Daniel Whitmore hated quiet. That was something Ava had learned early in the marriage. Silence made him uncomfortable. It made him feel like he was losing control of the room, the conversation, the story he wanted people to believe. And lately, there had been too much silence around him. He stood in his office that evening, staring at numbers on his screen that refused to behave the way they should. The projections were off again, the margins tighter than they had any right to be, and the calls from lenders had started to sound less patient. He didn't say it out loud, he didn't have to. The pressure sat on his shoulders like weight he couldn't shake. Behind him, the door opened without a knock. Vanessa Clark stepped inside like she already belonged there. She didn't ask permission. She didn't hesitate. She crossed the room and leaned against his desk, her red coat catching the light in a way that felt intentional. You look like you're losing a war, she said lightly. Daniel exhaled through his nose. It's temporary. Everything is temporary, Vanessa replied, her voice soft. The question is which side you're on when it ends. He didn't like the way that sounded, but he didn't push back, because part of him knew she wasn't entirely wrong. She reached out, brushing her fingers over a file on his desk. You're still carrying dead weight. Daniel stiffened slightly. What are you talking about? Vanessa tilted her head, her expression almost sympathetic. Daniel, everyone sees it. You're trying to hold up something that's already collapsing, and you're doing it with the wrong people around you. He knew what she meant. She didn't say Ava's name. She didn't have to. She doesn't understand this world, Vanessa continued, her tone measured. She never has, and you keep pretending she does because it makes you feel like the good guy. Daniel looked away. That was the part that hit. Because once he had believed that he was the one lifting her up, that he had done something generous by marrying her. Now it felt different. Now it felt like he had made a mistake. Vanessa stepped closer, lowering her voice. You're not the man you're supposed to be when you're trying to carry someone who can't keep up. I'm not carrying anyone, he said quickly. But it came out too fast, too defensive. Vanessa didn't argue. She just gave a small, knowing smile. That was her strength. She didn't push, she planted. Then she let his own thoughts do the rest. Dinner tonight, she asked casually. Daniel hesitated. Not because he didn't want to, because he knew what it meant. Vanessa watched him, patient, confident. She already knew the answer. Come over, he said finally. Her smile widened just slightly. Good, she said. I'll be there. She turned and walked out like she had just closed a deal. Daniel stood there for a moment longer, staring at the door after she left. Then he looked back at his screen. The numbers hadn't changed. If anything, they looked worse. Ava returned to the house just before sunset. The place felt different the second she stepped inside. Not because anything had changed physically, because she could feel the shift. Voices carried from the living room. Margaret's voice, sharp, controlled, and another voice, Vanessa's. Ava paused in the entryway for a second. Then she stepped forward. They were both there. Margaret sat upright on the couch, her posture perfect, her expression already set in judgment. Vanessa stood nearby, a glass of wine in her hand, completely at ease, too at ease. Daniel stood between them, like he was hosting something, like this was normal, like this was his life now. Ava took it in without reacting. Vanessa's eyes flicked toward her immediately, then down, then back up again, a slow, deliberate look, and then she smiled. Oh, Vanessa said lightly. You're back, not surprised, not uncomfortable, just casual, like Ava was the one out of place. Daniel cleared his throat. We're having dinner, he said, like it explained everything. Ava nodded once. I see that. Margaret let out a small laugh. Well, don't just stand there. You still live here, don't you? Or is that temporary too? Ava didn't respond. She set her bag down quietly. Vanessa took a slow sip of her wine, watching her over the rim of the glass. Then she walked past her, brushing just close enough to make contact. Intentional. On her way by, Vanessa reached out and picked up a coat draped over the chair. Ava's coat, she slipped it on without asking. It fit perfectly. Daniel didn't say a word. That was the moment. Not the insult, not the presence, or the silence. Ava looked at him, just once. He didn't meet her eyes because somewhere inside he knew, and it was easier not to acknowledge it. Vanessa turned back, smoothing the coat over her shoulders. This is nice, she said. You have good taste. Ava held her gaze. Then she stepped forward and took the coat gently from her hands. No, Ava said quietly, that's mine. The room shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough. Margaret's expression tightened. Excuse me? Ava didn't look at her. She folded the coat once, neatly, and set it over the back of the chair again. Then she walked past them toward the kitchen. It was a small thing, a small line. But it was the first one she had drawn in a long time. Behind her, Vanessa let out a soft laugh. Sensitive, she said under her breath. Daniel said nothing. Dinner was quiet in the wrong way. Not peaceful, controlled. Margaret filled the silence with comments that sounded polite but landed sharp. Vanessa asked questions that weren't really questions, and Daniel played along. Every time Ava spoke, it was short, measured, enough to exist in the conversation without inviting more. At one point, Vanessa reached across the table and rested her hand near Daniel's. Too close, too familiar. Ava saw it. She didn't react. But something inside her settled, not anger, not sadness, clarity. When dinner ended, she stood up first. I'm going upstairs, she said. Daniel didn't stop her, of course he didn't. In his mind, nothing had crossed a line yet. That was the problem. Upstairs, Ava closed the bedroom door behind her. For a moment, she stood still in the quiet, and she walked to the dresser and opened the top drawer. Inside, beneath neatly folded fabric, sat a thin envelope, heavy paper, unmarked on the outside except for one detail. Her name, not Ava Whitmore. Ava Sterling. She picked it up slowly. Turned it over in her hands, then she opened it. Inside were documents, clean, precise, final. Her phone buzzed again in her pocket. This time, she answered. Yes, she said. A voice on the other end spoke carefully. Everything is ready. We just need your signature to finalize the acquisition. Ava looked down at the papers in her hand, then toward the door, toward the life she was still standing inside. Send the confirmation, she said quietly, and prepare the closing. She ended the call. Then she sat down on the edge of the bed, the documents resting in her lap. Downstairs, laughter drifted faintly up through the house. Ava stared at the signature line, and finally she picked up the pen. Vanessa Clark didn't wait to be invited anymore. By the next evening, she walked into the Bellhaven house like it had already accepted her, like the space had adjusted around her presence and decided she belonged. Daniel noticed, and he didn't stop it. That was the shift Ava felt before she even stepped into the room. It wasn't just that Vanessa was there again, it was how she was there. Vanessa sat at the dining table before Ava arrived. Her chair pulled slightly closer to Daniel's than it should have been. Not accidental, not subtle. Margaret stood nearby, watching it with approval that she didn't bother to hide. You see? Margaret said as Ava entered, her voice light but sharp underneath. Some women understand how to carry themselves in a home like this. Ava paused just inside the doorway. The table was already set. 3 glasses, 3 plates, not 4. Vanessa looked up, smiling like nothing was wrong. Oh, she said, tilting her head slightly. I didn't realize you were joining us tonight. Ava stepped forward slowly. She didn't look at the table first. She looked at Daniel. He didn't meet her eyes. I told you we had plans, he said, adjusting his cuff like it mattered more than the moment. You didn't say you'd be back early. Ava let that sit for a second. Then she walked to the table and picked up a plate from the cabinet without asking. The sound of porcelain touching the surface was quiet. But it cut through the room anyway. I live here, she said simply. No anger, no volume, just fact. Vanessa watched her closely now, not smiling the same way. Ava took her seat, not at the end, not away from them. She sat in her place. The one Vanessa had already shifted closer to Daniel. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Margaret sighed long and theatrical. This doesn't have to be difficult, she said. Some people know when it's time to step aside. Ava reached for her glass. You're right, she said calmly. Margaret's eyes sharpened slightly. Vanessa leaned forward just enough to rest her elbow on the table, her fingers brushing lightly against Daniel's hand again. This time she didn't pull away. Daniel didn't either. That was the difference. That was the choice. Ava saw it, felt it settle into something final. Dinner moved forward like that. Vanessa talked easily, filling the space like she had been part of this house for years. She told stories about deals, about people Daniel knew, about places Ava had never been invited to. Except Ava had. Just not as the person they thought she was. Daniel laughed at the right moments, leaned in when Vanessa spoke, ignored Ava when she didn't. Margaret added small comments, approval where it mattered, criticism where it hurt. A slow, deliberate erasure. At one point, Vanessa reached for the wine bottle and poured herself another glass. Then, without looking, she reached across Ava's space to refill Daniel's. Her wrist brushed Ava's hand. She didn't apologize. Instead, she glanced down at Ava's ring, then at Daniel, then back at Ava, a small, almost curious smile. Funny thing about appearances, Vanessa said lightly. They don't always match reality. Daniel smirked. You can say that again. Ava set her fork down, not hard, not soft, just enough. I agree, she said. For the first time that evening, Vanessa hesitated. Only for a second, but Ava saw it because something in her tone didn't match the role they had assigned her. Daniel didn't catch it. He stood up instead, grabbing his glass. I've got a call, he said. Business. He didn't look at Ava when he said it. He walked out of the room, phone already to his ear. Vanessa watched him go, then leaned back in her chair like she had just gained more ground. Margaret turned to Ava. You see how much pressure he's under, she said, and you still sit here like you don't understand what's at stake. Ava met her gaze. I understand more than you think, Margaret scoffed. No, you don't. If you did, you wouldn't be here. That was the belief, that Ava stayed because she had nowhere else to go, because she needed them. Vanessa stood, picking up her glass. You don't have to fight it, she said, her tone almost gentle. Some people just aren't built for this kind of life. Ava stood too, slowly. She looked at Vanessa, then at Margaret, then toward the hallway where Daniel had disappeared. I'm not fighting anything, she said. That was the truth. She wasn't fighting, because the outcome had already been decided. They just didn't know it yet. She turned and walked out of the dining room. Upstairs, the house felt quieter, empty in a different way now. Ava moved to the dresser again, opening the drawer where the documents still rested. This time, she didn't hesitate. She took them out completely, spread them across the bed, pages of agreements, structures, transfers. Bellhaven Holdings listed clearly among them. No emotion crossed her face, but something inside her had shifted. Her phone rang. Not a message this time. A call, she answered. Yes, everything's ready for closing, the voice said. We just received confirmation from the last party. We're fully aligned. Ava glanced at the documents again. Good, she said. There is one more thing, the voice added carefully. The board wants you present at the signing. Media will be there. It's not something we can handle quietly anymore. Ava was silent for a moment. That had always been the line. The point where quiet ended and visibility began. Downstairs, she could hear faint laughter again, Vanessa's voice, Margaret's approval, Daniel moving between rooms like everything was still his. Ava looked toward the door, then back at the papers when she asked. 72 hours. The same window, the same countdown, Ava nodded, even though they couldn't see her. I'll be there, she said. She ended the call. Then she gathered the documents into a single stack and placed them back into the envelope. Not hidden, not anymore. She walked to the closet and pulled out a small suitcase, set it on the bed, opened it, not in anger, not in panic, in decision. Downstairs, Daniel's voice carried up again, louder this time, confident, certain, still unaware. Ava folded her clothes carefully, one piece at a time. No rush, no hesitation, because she wasn't leaving with nothing, she was leaving with everything. And in 72 hours, he would understand exactly what that meant. The house was quiet the next morning. Not peaceful, not calm, just hollow. Ava woke before the sun came up. She didn't rush, she didn't hesitate. The suitcase she had packed the night before sat near the door, closed, waiting. She moved through the bedroom slowly, picking up the few things she had left out. A book, a watch, the envelope, always the envelope. She checked it again, not because she doubted what was inside, but because habits mattered. Control mattered, everything was in place. Downstairs, she could already hear movement voices. Vanessa's voice, low and familiar in a way that didn't belong in that house. Margaret's voice, sharper, more satisfied than it had been in weeks. Daniel's voice, louder than both, confident again. That was new. Ava paused halfway down the stairs, listening. I told you, once this deal closes, everything changes, Daniel was saying. We're back where we should be. Vanessa laughed softly. I never doubted you, Margaret added. It's about time people remembered the Whitmore name. Ava stepped into the room. 3 heads turned. The conversation stopped. Vanessa sat at the kitchen island this time, not even pretending to keep distance. She wore another one of Ava's scarves now, tied loosely at her neck. Daniel leaned against the counter beside her, his posture relaxed in a way it hadn't been in days. Margaret stood nearby, watching Ava like she was measuring something. Leaving already? Margaret asked. Ava set her coffee cup down without answering. Daniel glanced at the suitcase by the door. His eyes narrowed slightly. You going somewhere? He asked. Ava looked at him. Out, she said again, the same word as before. But this time it meant something different. Daniel let out a short breath, almost a laugh. You've been out a lot lately. Vanessa tilted her head, watching Ava carefully. Busy life, she said lightly. Must be nice. Ava didn't respond. She moved toward the cabinet, taking out a mug, filling it with coffee like this was still her routine. Like this was still her house. Margaret crossed her arms. You should be thinking about what comes next, she said. This situation isn't sustainable. Ava turned slightly, her expression calm. What situation? Margaret's lips tightened. Don't play games. You can see what's happening. Ava held her gaze. Yes, she said quietly. I can. That was enough. Daniel stepped forward, his patience thinning. Look, we're not doing this back and forth, he said. Things are changing. I don't have time to manage complications. Complications, Ava let the words settle. Vanessa reached out, resting her hand on Daniel's arm, grounding him. You don't have to explain, she murmured. Some people just don't understand when it's over. Ava looked at her, really looked this time. Not at the coat, not at the scarf, not at the way she sat, at the confidence, at the certainty. Vanessa believed she had already won. That was the part that almost mattered more than anything Daniel had done. Ava took a slow sip of her coffee. Then she set the mug down. I won't make this difficult, she said. Daniel blinked, caught off guard for a second. Margaret straightened slightly, like she had been waiting for that line. Vanessa smiled. Good, Margaret said. That's the smartest thing you've said in a long time. Ava didn't react. She walked to the door and picked up her suitcase. Simple, clean, no drama. Daniel watched her now, something flickering behind his expression. Not regret, not yet. Something closer to relief. You'll figure something out, he said. You always do. It sounded almost like a compliment, almost. Ava paused with her hand on the handle. Then she looked back at him. For a while, she said. Her voice even, I thought so too. Daniel frowned slightly, like he didn't understand what she meant. Of course he didn't. She opened the door. Cold air slipped into the house. For a moment, everything felt still. Then she stepped outside. The city moved differently when you weren't pretending anymore. Ava drove without music, without distraction. Just the road and the quiet hum of something final settling into place. Her phone buzzed once. She answered immediately. Yes. We've confirmed all signatures on our end, the voice said. We're aligned for final execution. The board is expecting you tomorrow morning for pre-brief before the signing. Ava nodded to herself. Send me the updated file, she said. I want to review the final structure. It's already in your inbox. She ended the call. At a red light, she opened her email. The document sat at the top. Subject line clean, direct. Final acquisition package. Yours opened it. Scrolled. Everything was there. Every clause, every transfer, every line that moved power from one place to another. Bellhaven Holdings appeared halfway down the page. A small section, buried, almost invisible, but Ava read it slower than the rest. The restructuring terms were clear. Ownership absorbed, debt consolidate. No room for negotiation, no room for Daniel. Ava closed the file. The light turned green. She drove on. By late afternoon, she was back in the building, not the house, or the other one. The one where people stood when she entered, the one where no one questioned her presence. Inside the conference room, a smaller group waited this time. Legal, finance, one senior advisor. No distractions, no performance. Any changes? Or someone asked. Ava shook her head. No. Then we're ready, the advisor said. Once you sign, it's locked. Ava sat down. The document was printed this time. Physical, final. She flipped through the pages again. Not because she needed to. Because this was the moment, the point of no return. Her phone buzzed again. She glanced at it. A message from Daniel. Dinner tonight. We need to talk. Ava stared at it for a second. Then she set the phone face down on the table. She picked up the pen, not rushed, not emotional, just precise. Her signature moved cleanly across the page. One line, that was all it took. The room shifted immediately. Not visibly, but the weight of it changed. It's done, someone said quietly. Ava placed the pen down. Yes, she said it was. Everything that came next was just consequence. That night, back at Bellhaven Drive, Daniel stood in the living room with his phone in his hand, still waiting, still expecting her to walk through the door. Vanessa sat on the couch, legs crossed, scrolling through something that made her smile. Margaret stood near the window, watching the street like she was waiting for confirmation. She'll come back, Daniel said. He didn't sound completely sure. Vanessa glanced up briefly. Maybe, she said. Margaret didn't answer. Daniel's phone buzzed. He looked down. Not a message from Ava. An email from a law firm. He recognized. Subject line, notice of acquisition bell. Haven Holdings's brow furrowed. He opened it, and as his eyes moved across the first few lines, something in his expression changed. Not understanding yet, not fully, but the first crack was there, and it was already too late to stop what had begun. Daniel read the email twice, then a third time. The words didn't change, they just got heavier. Noter of acquisition, Bellhaven, Holdings. He scrolled down slowly, his jaw tightening with each line. Legal language, formal structure. Names is recognized, names he didn't. It didn't make sense, it couldn't. Something wrong? Vanessa asked, glancing up from her phone. Daniel didn't answer right away. He kept reading. There, restructuring, he said finally, his voice lower now. It's part of a larger acquisition. Margaret stepped closer, her heels clicking against the floor. What acquisition? Daniel shook his head slightly. I don't know yet. It's not finalized. That wasn't true, but it was what he chose to believe. Vanessa stood and walked over, leaning in just enough to see part of the screen. That's normal, she said smoothly. Big deals like this, they move quietly until the last second. Daniel nodded, gripping his phone a little tighter. Yes, he said. Exactly. He needed it to be normal. He needed it to be something he was part of. Or, they wouldn't move on Bellhaven without involving me, he added, more to himself than to them. Vanessa didn't correct him. Margaret didn't question it. Because they both needed the same thing, for him to still be in control. The next morning, Daniel arrived at his office earlier than usual. The building felt colder than he remembered. Or maybe it was just him. He walked through the lobby without stopping, ignoring the receptionist's greeting. His mind was already ahead, running through explanations, possibilities, outcomes. By the time he reached his office, his phone was already ringing. Unknown number, he answered. Daniel Whitmore. Mr. Whitmore, a calm voice said. This is Jonathan Price from Sterling and Klein Legal. We're representing the acquiring party in the Bellhaven restructuring. Daniel froze for a second, then forced himself to respond. Right, yes. I saw the notice. I was actually expecting someone to reach out. That part felt like control. The voice on the other end remained steady. We'd like to confirm your attendance at the signing in 3 days. Daniel exhaled slowly. Of course. I'll be there. There will be a brief pre-meeting prior to the signing. Details will be sent to you shortly. Who's the acquiring? Daniel asked, a pause. Not long, just enough. You'll be informed at the meeting, the voice replied. Daniel's grip tightened again. I need to understand what I'm walking into, he said, sharper now. You will, the man said. At the appropriate time, the line went dead. Daniel stared at the phone. He didn't like that. He didn't like not knowing, but he told himself it was strategy. Big players moved like that, and he was still one of them. Across the city, Ava sat in a smaller conference room, reviewing final details. No large screens this time, no audience, just precision. A senior advisor stood across from her, flipping through a tablet. All external parties have been notified. Attendance is confirmed. Media interest is significant. Ava nodded slightly. That part didn't matter to her. What about internal leaks, she asked. Contained, he said. No one has connected you directly to the acquisition publicly. Ava leaned back in her chair. Good, that line still held for now. Then we proceed as planned, she said. The advisor hesitated for a second. There is one variable. Ava looked at him. Whitmore, he said. He's asking questions. Nothing unusual yet. But he's not entirely in the dark anymore. Ava's expression didn't change. He won't understand until the signing, she said. That's the assumption, the advisor replied. But if he pushes, he won't, Ava said quietly. Not because she underestimated Daniel. Because she understood him. He would cling to the version of reality that made him feel safe, even when it started to break. Send me the updated seating chart, she added. The advisor nodded. As he left, Ava stayed seated for a moment longer. Her phone sat on the table in front of her. Silent. No messages from Daniel. That too said something, he was thinking. Trying to solve something he didn't have the pieces for. Ava reached for the phone, then stopped. She didn't need to check. She already knew where this was going. That evening, Daniel returned home earlier than usual. The house felt the same, but it didn't. Something had shifted. Vanessa was there again, sitting in the living room like she had settled into the rhythm of the place. Margaret sat beside her, both of them mid-conversation. They stopped when Daniel walked in. Well? Margaret asked immediately. What did they say? Daniel set his keys down harder than necessary. It's a restructuring. Part of a larger acquisition. I've been invited to the signing. Vanessa's eyes lit up slightly. That's good. It's expected, Daniel corrected. But there was tension under it now. What's the acquiring firm? Margaret pressed. Daniel hesitated, then shrugged. They'll disclose it at the meeting. Margaret frowned. That doesn't make sense. It does, Vanessa cut in smoothly. If it's a major deal, they control the narrative. Timing matters. Daniel nodded again, grateful for the support. Yes. Exactly. Vanessa stood and walked closer, her presence steadying him. This could be bigger than you think, she said. If they're absorbing your debt, you're not just surviving, you're being repositioned. Daniel looked at her. That version felt better. Cleaner. You think so, he asked. I know how these deals work, she said softly. They don't bring someone like you into the room unless you matter. Daniel straightened slightly. That was what he needed to hear. Her posture shifting back into confidence. I told you, she said. This family doesn't fall. It adjusts. Daniel almost smiled. Almost, then his phone buzzed again. Another email. This one shorter. Objegged boardroom access confirmation, he opened it. A principal line stood out. Principal owner will be present. Principal owner, not a committee, not a group, one person. He read it again, then looked up. Whoever this is, he said slowly, they're not hiding behind a board. Vanessa tilted her head. That means confidence, Margaret, or arrogance. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly. Either way, it meant power. And for the first time since the email arrived, he felt something else beneath the tension. Curiosity. Because whoever was behind this was about to walk into a room with him, and Daniel Whitmore had no idea. He had already thrown her out of his house. The boardroom was already filling when Daniel arrived. Floor-to-ceiling glass overlooked the gray skyline, the kind of view meant to remind everyone in the room exactly how high they'd climbed or how far they could fall. Long, polished table, black leather chairs, quiet conversations that stopped the moment someone new walked in. This wasn't a room for small deals. Daniel felt it immediately. He adjusted his jacket as he stepped inside, Vanessa on his arm, Margaret just behind them. He kept his chin up, his pace steady. Confidence wasn't optional here, it was the price of entry. Stay close, he murmured to Vanessa. She smiled like she already belonged. Margaret said nothing, but her posture had changed. Pride had returned. The Whitmore name still meant something here, or at least she believed it did. Daniel scanned the room, executives, lawyers, media set up along the side with cameras angled toward the table. Not loud, not chaotic, just waiting for something big or good. That meant he was in the right place. A man in a dark suit approached him, mid-50s, controlled smile. Mr. Whitmore, he said, extending a hand. Glad you could make it. Daniel shook it firmly, wouldn't miss it. You'll be seated near the front, the man said. There will be a brief introduction before the signing. Daniel nodded. And the acquiring party? The man's smile didn't move. You'll meet her shortly, her. Daniel felt something tighten in his chest. He didn't show it. Vanessa caught the shift just for a second. Female founder, she said lightly. That's interesting. The man only nodded and stepped away. Daniel watched him go. Her, that word stayed with him longer than it should have. They took their seats, front section, exactly where Daniel expected to be. He leaned back slightly, crossing one leg over the other, letting the room settle around him. Vanessa sat close, her hand resting lightly on his arm like a quiet claim. Margaret sat straight, eyes sharp, taking everything in. This is bigger than I thought, Vanessa whispered. Daniel didn't answer right away. He was watching the lawyers at the far end of the table. The way they organized documents. The way they spoke in low tones, precise, careful. There was no chaos here, no uncertainty. Whoever was behind this had already decided everything that should have bothered him more. Instead, it felt like reassurance. Control existed, he just hadn't seen it yet. You'll be fine, Vanessa said softly, squeezing his arm. This is exactly where to slow breath. Yes, he said, it is. Across the room, two senior executives spoke quietly. Is she here yet? Not yet. They're all waiting. They should be. Daniel caught pieces of it, not enough to understand, just enough to notice. They're talking like she runs the room, he muttered. Vanessa tilted her head. If she's the majority owner, she does. Margaret leaned slightly closer. People like that don't show up early, she said. They make an entrance. Daniel almost smiled. That sounded right. Minutes passed. More people took their seats. The room filled, but the tension didn't break. It tightened. A lawyer stepped forward to the head of the table. We'll begin shortly, he said. Cameras adjusted. Pens were placed carefully beside thick stacks of documents. Daniel's phone buzzed once. He glanced down, a message from an unknown number. Be ready. That was it. No name, no context. Daniel frowned. What is it? Vanessa asked. Nothing, he said, locking the screen, but it didn't feel like nothing. He slipped the phone into his pocket, his focus shifting. Be ready. For what? At the far end of the room, the double doors remained closed. Everyone's attention kept drifting back to them. Waiting, always waiting. Daniel felt it now too. Not fear, not yet. Just a growing awareness that something wasn't lining up the way he expected. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table. This deal, he said under his breath. It's not just about debt. Vanessa glanced at him. What do you mean? They're not just cleaning up a balance sheet, he said. They're consolidating power. Vanessa studied him for a second, then smiled. Exactly. And you're part of that now. Daniel nodded slowly. Yes, that was the version that made sense. That was the version where he still mattered. A senior banker entered quietly and spoke to the lead lawyer. The lawyer nodded, then looked up. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice cutting clean through the room, "we're ready to begin." Conversations stopped. Chairs shifted, cameras locked into position. Daniel straightened in his seat. This was it. "This acquisition," the lawyer continued, "represents one of the largest private consolidations in the region. The acquiring group has chosen to remain discreet until today, but their presence here reflects the scale and certainty of this transaction." Daniel felt his heartbeat pick up. This isn't just restructuring, he thought. This is something else. The lawyer glanced toward the doors. "We are now waiting for the principal owner." Again that word. Owner. Singular. Vanessa's fingers tightened slightly on his arm. Margaret leaned forward just enough to show she was paying attention. Daniel kept his eyes fixed on the doors. He didn't realize he had stopped breathing. Across the room, a few executives stood without being told. Others followed. A ripple. Not panic, respect, real respect. Daniel noticed it, his brow furrowed slightly. Why were they standing already? The doors hadn't even opened. Then the handles moved, just a fraction, but it was enough. The room went completely silent. Or not quiet, silent. The kind of silence that presses against your ears. Daniel sat up straighter. Vanessa shifted beside him, her expression sharpening. Margaret's fingers tightened in her lap. The doors began to open. Slow, deliberate. And in that moment, before anyone stepped through, Daniel felt something he couldn't explain. A brief, sharp sense that he had missed something important, something obvious, something standing right in front of him all along. The doors opened wider, and someone stepped inside. Daniel leaned forward instinctively, trying to see clearly, and then his phone vibrated again. He glanced down without thinking. A second message. Same unknown number. "She's already in the room." The words on Daniel's screen didn't make sense. "She's already in the room." His eyes lifted instantly, scanning the space again. Sharper this time, not casually, not with confidence. With something closer to urgency, the doors had opened. People had entered, assistants, legal staff. A senior banker who moved quickly to the front. But no one who matched what the room was waiting for. No one who made people stand like that. Daniel's gaze moved from face to face. Executives avoided looking at him now. Not deliberately, just naturally. Like their attention had shifted to something more important. Vanessa leaned in. "Who's already in the room?" she whispered. Daniel didn't answer, because for the first time since he walked in, he wasn't sure. At the front, the lead lawyer adjusted his papers. "Thank you for your patience," he said calmly. "We can proceed." Daniel frowned. "You said we were waiting," he called out, unable to stop himself. "For the principal owner." A few heads turned. Vanessa stiffened beside him. Margaret's hand tightened in her lap. The lawyer didn't look annoyed. He looked careful. "We were," he said, "and we are no longer waiting." A quiet ripple moved through the room. Daniel felt it in his chest before he understood it. No longer waiting. That meant, "She's here?" Vanessa asked, her voice tighter now. The lawyer didn't answer her. He simply looked toward the center of the table. Not the doors, not the entrance, the table. And slowly, deliberately, people began to turn in the same direction. Daniel followed their gaze. And for a split second, his mind rejected what he saw, because it didn't fit the story he had built. It didn't fit the version of reality he had been living in. Ava Sterling was already seated at the table. Not at the edge, not in the back. At the center, she hadn't been there when he walked in. He was sure of it. He would have seen her. He would have, would he? The thought hit him like something cold. Ava sat still, no phone, no papers in front of her yet. Just her hands resting lightly on the table, fingers relaxed, posture straight. Calm. Exactly the same calm she had on the lawn. Exactly the same calm that had irritated him then. But here it felt different. Dangerous. Vanessa let out a small, disbelieving laugh. "What is she doing here?" Margaret's voice came sharp low. "This is a closed meeting." Daniel pushed back his chair slightly, rising halfway. "Ava," he said, his tone shifting into something forced, something public. "This isn't the place for—" "Sit down, Daniel." Her voice wasn't loud, but it stopped him. Completely. It wasn't the words, it was the certainty behind them. The room felt it too. He could see it in the way no one interrupted. No one moved, even the cameras stayed perfectly still. Daniel slowly lowered himself back into his chair. Not because he wanted to. Because something in him had already started to understand he didn't control this moment anymore. Vanessa leaned closer, whispering quickly, "She's trying to embarrass you. That's all this is. Just stay calm." Daniel didn't respond. Because he was watching Ava, or really watching her now, and noticing things he hadn't noticed before. The way the senior banker stood slightly behind her, not beside her. The way one of the lead attorneys had already shifted a stack of documents in her direction. The way people weren't looking at her with confusion. They were waiting for her. The lawyer spoke again. For those who have not yet been formally introduced, he said, his voice measured, we will proceed with confirmation of authority before execution of the agreement. Daniel's jaw tightened. Authority, he repeated under his breath. The lawyer continued. The acquiring entity is held through a private structure. Final authority rests with its founder and majority owner. Founder-majority owner. Daniel's pulse picked up. He glanced at Vanessa. She wasn't smiling anymore. The lawyer turned slightly. Toward Ava, he said, with quiet respect, if you would. The name landed, not new, not unfamiliar. But different here. He had heard it 100 times, just not like that, or not with that tone. Daniel felt something crack in his chest. No, he said under his breath, almost to himself. Ava didn't look at him. She didn't look at anyone. She simply reached forward, one hand moving to the stack of documents that had been placed in front of her, and then she signed the first page, clean, steady, like she had done it 1,000 times before. The lawyer nodded once. Authority confirmed, or the words echoed. Vanessa's fingers slipped off Daniel's arm. Margaret made a small sound, barely audible but enough. Daniel leaned forward, his voice sharper now. What authority? No one answered him, not immediately, because the room didn't belong to him anymore. The lawyer turned a page. As part of this transaction, he continued, the acquiring group will assume controlling interest in all listed subsidiaries, including Bellhaven Holdings, Daniel's company. His breath caught. Controlling interest? He repeated, louder now. That's not. We agreed to restructuring. Not. You agreed to terms presented to you, the lawyer said calmly. Those terms are reflected in the documents your counsel reviewed. Daniel's mind raced. He remembered the meetings, the summaries, the urgency. He hadn't read every page. He hadn't needed to. He thought he understood the outcome. He thought he looked at Ava again. She finally met his eyes, and for the first time he saw something he hadn't seen before. Not anger, not hurt, clarity. You said you didn't understand the deal, Daniel said, his voice tightening, trying to regain ground. You said you didn't even follow half of what I was explaining. A few people in the room shifted, not toward him, away from him. Ava held his gaze for a long second, then she spoke. I didn't say I didn't understand, she said evenly. I said you didn't need to explain it to me. The difference hit harder than anything else that had been said. Vanessa sat completely still now. Margaret's face had gone pale. Daniel felt heat rise in his chest. This is a joke, he said. You don't belong here. Ava didn't respond. She turned slightly and nodded once to the lawyer. The next document was placed in front of her. Thicker, more detailed, the kind that decided things permanently. The lawyer spoke again. For the record, he said, the acquiring group, under Ms. Sterling's authority, has elected to absorb and restructure Bellhaven Holdings in full. Absorb, restructure. Daniel heard the words, but what he understood was simpler. Gone. No, he said, standing now fully. No, that's not how this works. You don't get to just walk in here and sit down. This time, it wasn't Ava. It was the senior banker, and the tone was different. Not calm, firm, final. Daniel froze, because this time it wasn't personal, it was institutional. He looked around the room. No one was on his side. No one was even pretending to be. Vanessa didn't touch him. Margaret didn't speak. He was alone. Ava picked up the pen again. She paused for a fraction of a second, then signed, and the moment the pen left the page, something invisible shifted. Not loud, not dramatic, but absolute. Daniel stared at her, at the woman he had thrown out, at the woman he had called nothing. And for the first time, the thought formed fully. Clear, terrifying. I don't know who you are. Ava looked at him again. Not cold, not cruel, just honest. That's the problem, she said quietly. Across the room, one of the attorneys stepped forward with another document. Final schedule, he said. Includes liquidation of personal guarantees tied to Bellhaven Holdings. Daniel, head snapped toward him. Personal guarantees? The attorney nodded. Filed under your name. Daniel felt the floor shift beneath him, because that meant one thing. Everything didn't just disappear. It followed him. He turned back to Ava. Desperate now, angry, lost. You knew, he said. You knew this was happening. She didn't deny it. Didn't confirm it. She just watched him. And that silence told him everything. The lawyer placed the final folder in front of her. This concludes the acquisition phase, he said. Remaining actions will proceed as outlined. Ava closed the folder slowly, or carefully, like she was finishing something that had been decided long before today. Daniel couldn't breathe properly now. Vanessa finally spoke, her voice low, uncertain. "Daniel, what does this mean?" He didn't answer, because he was staring at Ava. And for the first time, he realized the truth wasn't just that she had power, it was that she had always had it. Ava stood, not in a rush, not to make a point, just because she was done. And as she did, the senior banker stepped aside for her. The lawyer moved with her. The room shifted with her, like gravity had changed direction. Daniel didn't follow, he couldn't. He stayed where he was, watching her walk away. And then one more thing. A quiet voice behind him. An older man, someone who had been silent the entire meeting. "Mr. Whitmore," he said, placing a thin document on the table in front of Daniel. Daniel looked down. His name was on it. Or so was Ava's. Different section, different role, different position entirely. He didn't understand all of it. Not yet. But one line stood out. Clear, unavoidable. Final approval authority, Ava Sterling. Daniel's hands went still, because now it wasn't a feeling. It wasn't a suspicion. It was written. And there was no one left in the room to explain it away. He looked up, but Ava was already gone. The room didn't empty all at once. It dissolved. People stood in quiet clusters, voices low, controlled. Papers were gathered, phones came out. Assistants moved quickly, but without panic. It was the kind of aftermath that followed something decisive, something final. Daniel hadn't moved. The document with his name on it still lay in front of him. Final approval authority, Ava Sterling. He read the line again and again. Each time it settled deeper. Not a mistake, not a misunderstanding, a fact. Vanessa was the first to stand. Not dramatically, not loudly, just carefully, like someone testing the ground after a crack had formed beneath them. "Daniel," she said, her voice softer now, stripped of its earlier confidence. "We should go," he didn't respond. His eyes were still on the paper. "Daniel," this time sharper. He blinked once, like pulling himself back. "What?" Vanessa hesitated. For the first time since he had met her, she didn't have the next move ready. This isn't over," she said. "We just need to talk to your lawyers. To clarify the terms, there's always leverage. Leverage." The word sounded hollow now. Daniel looked up at her slowly. "Did you know?" he asked. Vanessa froze. "Know what?" "About her." The silence between them stretched. Then she shook her head. "No, of course not." He watched her face. For a second he tried to believe her, then he looked away. Because even if she was telling the truth, it didn't matter. Margaret stood more abruptly. "This is unacceptable," she said, loud enough for the few people still nearby to hear. "There has to be a mistake. Your attorneys reviewed and signed off on the structure." One of the legal associates replied calmly as he passed. "All disclosures were made in accordance with the agreement." Margaret's lips tightened. "They didn't disclose this," she snapped, gesturing toward the empty space where Ava had been. The associate didn't stop walking. "They disclosed everything required." Required. That word landed differently. It meant something had been there, all along. They just hadn't seen it. Daniel pushed his chair back and stood. Slowly this time, not with anger. With weight, he picked up the document. His fingers tightened slightly around the edge. "Where is she?" he asked. No one answered. Because she wasn't in the room anymore, she had already moved on. The hallway outside felt colder, quieter, like the building itself had shifted after the deal closed. Daniel walked faster than he meant to. Vanessa kept up beside him. Margaret followed, her heels sharp against the floor. "We need to find her," Margaret said. "She cannot walk away from this without explaining." "She doesn't have to explain anything," Daniel said. The words surprised even him. They came out flat, certain. Because deep down, he was starting to understand something he hadn't wanted to see. This wasn't her stepping into his world. It had always been her world. He had just been living in it without knowing. They reached the lobby. Glass, marble, clean lines, security positioned near the entrance. Ava wasn't there. Of course she wasn't. People like her didn't linger after they were done. Vanessa slowed. Her eyes moved quickly now, scanning, calculating. "She'll still need to finalize things," she said. "There are always follow-ups, meetings. If we can get ahead of it." Daniel stopped walking. She almost ran into him. "What?" she asked. He turned to her, really looked at her, and for the first time, he saw her clearly. Not as the answer, Not as the upgrade, just as someone who had been standing in the right place at the right time. "That's what you think this is?" he asked quietly. "A process," she said. "Yes." Daniel let out a short breath, no humor in it. "It's finished," he said. Vanessa shook her head immediately. "Nothing like this is ever finished." He held her gaze for a second longer. Then he looked past her, because someone else had just stepped into the lobby. Elliot Graves, the gardener. Or at least, that was the role Daniel had placed him in. He stood near the entrance, hands loosely at his sides, posture relaxed but steady. Out of place, and yet not. Daniel frowned. "What is he doing here?" Margaret whispered, her voice sharp again. "This is not his." Elliot didn't look at her. He looked at Daniel, and there was something in his expression that Daniel couldn't ignore. Not judgment, not anger. Recognition. Daniel took a few steps forward. "You," he said, stopping a few feet away. "What are you doing here?" Elliot's gaze didn't shift. "I was waiting," he said simply. "For what?" Elliot glanced toward the doors behind Daniel, then back to him. "For this to end." Daniel's jaw tightened. "This isn't your concern." Elliot nodded once. "You're right," he said. "It never was." The words weren't insulting, but they landed that way. Daniel stepped closer. "Then say what you came to say and leave." Elliot studied him for a moment, not like an employee, not like someone beneath him, like someone who had been watching from a distance for a long time. "You built your life on something fragile," Elliot said quietly. "Reputation, appearances, control." Daniel's hands curled slightly. And you never asked what was holding it up." Daniel didn't respond, because he already knew the answer. He just hadn't wanted to say it out loud. Elliot continued. "She did. That was it. No explanation. No elaboration. Just 2 words. And somehow they carried more weight than everything else that had been said in that building." Margaret stepped forward sharply. "This is ridiculous. We are not standing here being lectured by enough," Daniel said. "But final." Margaret stopped, because something in his voice had changed. Vanessa shifted beside him again. Uneasy now. "Daniel, we need to focus," she said. "This doesn't change what we can do next." He turned to her slowly. "It changes everything." She shook her head. "Only if you let it." Daniel looked at her, then at Elliot, then back at the building behind him. The glass reflected his own image back at him. For a second, he didn't recognize it, because the version of himself he had been holding on to, the one in control, the one choosing, the one above her, that version didn't exist anymore. His phone buzzed again. This time he didn't hesitate. He pulled it out, a new message, not from the unknown number, from a law firm. Subject line, notice of enforcement. His stomach dropped. He opened it. The words came fast. Formal, precise. Personal guarantees triggered. Asset review initiated. Property liens pending. Daniel stopped reading, because he didn't need to finish. He understood. This wasn't just about losing the company. It was about everything tied to it. The house, the accounts, the life he had been protecting. All of it. Vanessa leaned closer. He didn't show her, didn't answer, because something in him had shifted again. Not panic, not yet. Something colder, clearer. Across the lobby, one of the reception staff approached cautiously. "Mr. Whitmore," she said. Daniel looked up. "There's a call waiting for you." He frowned. "From who?" She checked the screen in her hand. Sterling Holdings. The name hit like a second impact. Not Ava, not directly, but close enough. Daniel felt every pair of eyes on him again. Vanessa's, Margaret's, even Elliot's, waiting. He stared at the receptionist, at the phone in her hand. At the one call that could explain everything, or take whatever was left, and for the first time since the lawn he hesitated. Then he reached for it and lifted it to his ear. "Daniel Whitmore," he said. A pause. Then a voice, "Calm, professional, Mr. Whitmore," the voice said. "We're calling regarding the next phase of Miss Sterling's directive." Daniel's grip tightened. Because now it wasn't just over, it was continuing, and he had no idea what came next. The house on Bellhaven Drive was no longer theirs. That part had been quick, not loud, just paperwork, timelines, signatures, the kind of quiet process that erased something big without needing to make a scene. Daniel Whitmore stood across the street one last time, staring at it. The same porch, the same windows, the same place where he had thrown her suitcase onto the lawn. Now it looked smaller. Not because it had changed, because he had. He exhaled slowly, then turned away. There was nothing left for him there. Weeks passed, then months. The story spread, but not the way Daniel had imagined. Not headlines about his comeback, not praise for surviving the deal, just quiet facts. Bellhaven Holdings had been absorbed. Its former owner had stepped down, assets restructured, liabilities enforced. People moved on quickly, they always did. Vanessa Clark moved on faster than most. She disappeared from Daniel's life without a conversation, without a message. One day she was there, still trying to spin outcomes into opportunity. The next she wasn't. He heard she had taken a position at another firm. Closer to new money, closer to new power, exactly where she always intended to be. Margaret Whitmore lasted longer. Pride didn't leave as easily as ambition. She'd tried to fight it at first. Calls to attorneys, complaints about disclosures, quiet attempts to salvage reputation. None of it worked, because reputation doesn't survive truth when truth is stronger. Eventually, even she stopped. Not because she accepted it, because she ran out of ways to deny it. Daniel wrote the letter 3 times before he sent it. The first version was angry. The second was defensive. The third was honest. He didn't expect an answer. He wrote it anyway. He told Ava he understood now. Not everything, but enough. He told her he saw what he had done. Not just the betrayal, the blindness, or the way he had needed her to be small so he could feel large. The way he had mistaken silence for weakness and how wrong that had been. He signed it simply Daniel. No last name, no title. Or just the man he should have been from the beginning. He sent it and waited. Ava Sterling never replied. Her life did not explode into something louder. It became quieter, not smaller, quieter. She chose a house that didn't sit above anything. Or no long driveway, no gates, no need to prove anything, just space light. Air that didn't feel like it belonged to anyone else. There was a garden in the back, white roses along the fence. Not perfect, not arranged for display. Or real, she spent mornings there sometimes. Not working, not deciding anything, just being still. The wooden sparrow sat on the fence post, most days weathered. Unimpressive to anyone who didn't know what it meant. Everything to her. Elliot Graves worked in the garden like he always had. Slow, precise, quiet. But he wasn't just a gardener, he never had been. One morning, Ava stepped outside with a cup of coffee, watching him trim the roses. "You stayed," she said. Elliot glanced up briefly, then back to the plant. "I was always meant to." She walked closer. "You could have told me sooner." Elliot smiled slightly. "You would have done what?" She didn't answer, because she knew the truth. Nothing. Or she would have still made the same choices, still stayed, still watched, still waited. "I was there to make sure you didn't forget who you were," he said. Ava nodded slowly. "I didn't," she said. "No," Elliot agreed. "You didn't." There was a pause. Then she asked the question she had never asked before. "How long did you know?" Elliot set his shears down gently. "Long enough," he said. She studied him. "You never stepped in. That wasn't my place." "And the lawn?" she asked quietly. Elliot's expression shifted. Not regret, not pride, just truth. That was the moment it stopped being yours to carry alone. Ava looked out at the roses, at the fence, at the quiet space she had built for herself. "I always knew what he was," she said after a moment. Elliot didn't respond. He didn't need to. "I just wanted to see if it would ever change," she added. "And did it?" She shook her head once. "No." The letter stayed unopened on her desk for 2 days. Then she read it once. Slowly, carefully. She didn't cry, didn't smile, didn't react the way people expected when someone finally said the right words too late. She folded it neatly and placed it back in the envelope. Then she put it away, not as something to hold on to, as something finished. Forgiveness didn't look like returning. It didn't look like answering. It didn't look like giving someone another chance to hurt her again. It looked like something quieter, letting the weight go, not for him, for herself, because she had carried enough. Weeks later, she stood in the garden again. Same spot, same light, the sparrow in her hand. She turned it over once, running her thumb along the rough edge of its wing, then she sat back on the fence, facing outward, toward open space, not back toward the house she left behind. Forward. She didn't need to prove anything anymore. Not to Daniel, not to Margaret, not to anyone who had measured her wrong. She had never been empty. They had just never known how to see. Some stories end with noise, or with shouting, with everything breaking at once. This one didn't. It ended the way it began, quiet. But this time, the quiet belonged to her, and it was enough. If this story stayed with you, tell me, would you have answered his letter, or walked away the same way she did?